Vice President, it's an honor to be here with you. And tonight we want to talk about the war on cancer. We want to talk about the initiative that you've put together to hopefully help all of us in the field fighting cancer and the people with cancer. So when President Obama, a year, 16 months ago, said to you at the State of the Union, lead our charge, what went through your head? I mean, what was the feeling at that moment?
Well, to begin with, you know, it's important to know what you don't know. And it's important to have a sense of what you need to know. I got involved, as David said, because I lost part of my soul. And many of you have been through it. Many of you are survivors. And you know the worst thing for a parent is to look at a child, no matter how old they are, and you know they have a serious problem. There's not a damn thing you can do to do anything about it. And my son was diagnosed. He was a hell of a kid. Presumptuous of me to say this, but he was the finest man I ever knew. He was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He was a decorated war hero. He was a serious, serious guy. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma in the brain. And it didn't take me much to learn that that was basically a death sentence. Some, I guess, and they don't know why. Some people make it, but what, 1%? Some
Very small number.
And so I did what all of you've done. I went out and tried to learn as much as I possibly could to see if there's anything I could find out to give him hope or to give my family hope. Because the one thing I know from my own experiences in the past that affected me, losing another child and my wife, my kid, is that what you desperately need is you need hope. Even when the outcome is not likely to be good, you still need to be able to hope. And so I had access because of, I was an MD. I think it's a great, great hospital, great docs. And I was vice president and everything at my disposal to get to meet David and a lot of, I mean this sincerely, people of his caliber. And what I learned was, David, that we were kind of at an inflection point. Only about 5 years earlier did you guys all start talking to one another. I'm not being facetious, but you know, immunotherapy was like a voodoo science. It was the whole, I won't go through it, you all know it, I'm speaking to a very well-informed audience. And so it all came out of, we were struggling with the decision of whether to run for president while Bo was dying, and I couldn't tell anybody because he insisted that, you know, Dad, when anybody asks you about me, smile. Smile, let them know I'm doing fine. Don't look down, don't, you know. So we couldn't say anything. And so in the meantime, the mechanism was going as if I was going to run. I couldn't tell people I was not likely to do that. It would have, just was difficult. And so the night we decided for certain we weren't going to run, I called the president to tell him, and I said, I'm going to make the announcement tomorrow. And he said, well, let me go out in the Rose Garden with you and make the announcement with me there with you. And so Jill and I walked out, and it was spontaneous. It wasn't intended. I said, I know you already asked me, do I have any regrets? I said, I have one regret. I would have loved to have been the president to preside over the beginning and the end of cancer as we know it. And that was the last I said anything about it. And the president, he does it all the time to me, or did it all the time to me. I'm sitting behind him in the State of the Union. He says, and by the way, Joe's doing a moonshot. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, good. What the hell else is new? But literally, he didn't tell me. And so what I tried to do, David, and because I looked to you, and you were one of the first people I met with, is that I literally traveled the world. I went to every major cancer center in America and around the world to learn as much as I could learn, to see if there was any consensus that existed among all of you as to what wasn't happening, what was happening. And it really became clear to me as someone who's been involved with not the healthcare side, but with national security, foreign policy, issues that there was, I was stunned at what wasn't being done, the lack of cooperation, the lack of sharing data. It was just kind of mind-blowing. I thought that, no, that can't be, that you don't do A, B, C, and D. And so that's how it all started, David. And I got deeply involved in it. And you were one of the first people. That panel you were on had a couple Nobel laureates. It was a serious panel. And I remember one.
And there was me.
And there were, no. By the way, I want to read you. I brought an Agus quote, okay? From that time. And by the way, the people who were there were, some really serious folks like David. And during the question and answer period, and I didn't plan on doing the round table, Klaus Schwab called me and said, you're keynoting a speech on the fourth industrial revolution. Will there be a middle class? What will happen with digitalization and artificial intelligence? And by the way, how about doing cancer first? I swear to God, that's how it happened.
How about doing cancer?
Doing cancer first. Would I discuss it? Because, there are 88 heads of state there. There are 2,500 CEOs. And two things surprised me. One is the incredible interest that existed at that conference, and two, the caliber of people. But you may remember, I won't mention the names, but there were 4 folks there who were doing the same thing that Cancer Link was doing, and others acquiring data and so on and so forth. And so I walked over to them after. I said, when we get back to Washington, can I have a private meeting with you all? And they were spending about $1 billion combined. And they said, okay. And they sat with me and I didn't even have the staff. I want them to be completely able to talk. And I asked each one of them what they were doing. And they all told me. And I said, sounds like you're all doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And here's what happened. The only thing I'm pretty good at, from meeting with heads of state all my life and others, is reading body language. And here's what happened. I'm not joking.
Oh, believe me, I live this.
I know.
I'm with you.
But for me, it was an epiphany. And so we took a coffee break, and they'd wander up to me one at a time and say, Mr. Vice President, keep this up, will you? Keep the pressure on, because if I go ahead and move this, it's going to be... And it made me realize that, and I'll conclude by saying, here's the thing I found out. For me, you all know this. But for somebody who's been around all this time, I didn't know it. And most Americans, informed Americans, don't know it. When Nixon declared the war on cancer, he had no army, he had no tools.
1971.
1971. And I came to the Senate the next year, and he had nothing to work with. And the model that was set up to deal with this was the Jonas Salk model. One person in a laboratory was going to find it. So there was no ability to share, there was no inclination to share, and there wasn't presumed to be a need to share data. Well, 46 years later, you've made enormous progress in a whole range of areas. And to joke a little bit, you don't all play well in the sandbox. You don't talk to one another very much. You don't share the data. And it's changing a lot. But what dawned on me was that when the Cancer Moonshot, I went back to the president, I said, look, Mr. President, I have 2 objectives. You want me to do this. One is to inject an overwhelming urgency of now. Now. You're a clinician. How many times has someone come up to you and say, Doc, I know I'm not going to live, but Doc, can you give me 6 more weeks to see my daughter down the aisle? Can you just give me enough time to see my kid graduate? Just give me a little time, Doc. Give me a little time. And there's ways to, if we did make a single additional discovery, we can give more time.
I agree.
With this sense of urgency. The second thing is to change the culture. I'm not presuming to tell any doctor. I've never met I'm supposedly an expert on national security, strategic weapons. There's things I've spent my whole life on, START and all these organizations. You're among the most brilliant, dedicated people I've ever met in my life around the world. Working your rear ends off, Saturday, Sunday, but there is this notion that kind of like tomorrow. One of the things that I agree with you, and I'll stop, is that the idea of dealing with basic research is critical. We've got to find some money for applied research.
Yeah.
You got to be able to do something to give some people some hope, to have a shot. And there's a lot of good things. Don't get me wrong. I'm sounding too negative. A lot of really good things going on. But the end result is that now, I think after a number of things we've done in the Moonshot, I think there is a new sense of urgency. And by the way, I didn't do a damn thing. The only thing I'm good at is convening, and I'm going to say something very presumptuous. I think I've earned the reputation of being straight, and I don't have any dog in the fight. So I'm not with this particular group or that particular group that is completely transparent what I'm doing. And I have the ability to shame.
So you're now in the, obviously, post-White House. You could be sitting on the beach, you could be surfing, you could be watching TV. Instead, you're putting a good fraction of your time to the Biden Cancer Initiative. Are you doing it for you, for Bo, for other people with cancer? What's the root that drives you to make this difference here?
You know, I did Yale's commencement a couple years ago, not last year, the year before. And the students asked me to talk about resiliency and compassion. And I said, it's awful easy to be resilient when you look at people who've had the same thing that's happened to you without anywhere near the support you have. The incredible number of people who get up every day basically alone, put one foot in front of the other, move, as my father would say, they get up, they keep moving. And it's easy to be compassionate when you've been the recipient of so much attention in terms of dealing with whatever tragedy happened in your life. And so for me, it's one of the things I learned from losing my family early on is that a purpose-driven life solves a lot of problems. I really mean it. So it's hard to say, David, whether it's me, my son, other people, but it's just, it just seems like, and I have no illusions about what I can or can't do. I don't exaggerate my ability to affect things. But it's just, it's what Bo would want me to do. And it matters. It matters.
It certainly does. It does to all of us. And thank you. This past week, President Trump had his 100th day in office, and he announced what he thought his accomplishments were. 100 days from setting up the Biden Cancer Initiative. What are the milestones? Where can we put a stake in the ground? And all full disclosure, I've joined the board of the Biden Cancer Initiative because I believe in what the Vice President is doing. Thank you.
Well, look, I didn't have any, I thought that the Moonshot, and I think we've made some real progress. I think we've got a lot of collaborations with the task force, breaking down barriers in the federal government, getting them to cooperate more. The Blue Ribbon Commission, that a lot of some of you in the audience may be out here, I don't even know who's here, that decided to prioritize. We asked them to prioritize of all the things on the plate, what are the things we should most focus on to give us the biggest bang for the buck the quickest. The collaboration with private sector, it's real, the formulary, a lot of things are going on. And so I thought that, that I knew if Hillary had won, I would continue. And as a matter of fact, she asked me if I would continue to run it. And I thought that if President Trump won as well, that it would be continued. And there's so many things on the president's plate right now, even though I went to them first, and I made it clear I'll cooperate in any way I can and help in any way I can.
How did they respond?
Well, Vice President Pence is very interested. But I think it's, in fairness to them, they did not expect to win, and they weren't prepared to get up and organizationally, structurally deal with a whole lot of things that, I mean, there's still echo chambers in the State Department and the Defense Department. It's just, they hadn't thought through what they would do had they won, because I don't think they thought they're going to win. So I'm hopeful that they will continue. At the end of the term, you remember, David, we were told, and they told the congressmen and senators, that we could never pass the Cures Act, which had $6.2 billion, $1.8 billion, and we only had, started off, we had 120 votes, 160 votes in the House, and only 40-some in the Senate. And I said, this is crazy. I'm confident that we can do this. So I spent time in the Hill. We got 388 votes in the House, and we got almost 89 in the Senate. The point is that there is a desire to, the only nonpartisan thing left out there is the fight against cancer. And so what happened was that when I realized that they weren't going to take it up in an official way, although what we put in place is continuing some of the initiatives, it was guys like you and Eric and a bunch of people came to me and said, look, you ought to start this Biden initiative. I hadn't planned on doing that. And you guys brought in McKinsey and Company and others to help structurally figure out how to do this and what should we do. And essentially what we're going to be announcing, with the great help of David, I'm not being solicitous, and other really brilliant folks, is we are going to be announcing sometime the end of May, the beginning of June, the establishment of this initiative to focus on the same basic things, on access to data, on breaking down silos, on increasing the sense of urgency, on collaboration and cooperation, because there's so much. I mean, a layman like me can see there's so much that is just on the cusp of being able to be done. I mean, hell, we can do 1 million billion calculations per second right now if we can just aggregate enough data. I mean, it's just crazy stuff we're not doing. So, we're going to be announcing this initiative. It's not going to be, there was a big debate, and David was part of it, not debate, discussion with 23 or 24 of you back in Washington with me, that do we do something and raise a couple $2 billion and become, be dispensing grants? Well, that wasn't something I'm qualified to do, and nor did I think that was the best use of what I could be helpful in. And so what we're doing is we're hopefully, and David's helped me in this too, we're going to raise somewhere between 10 and $30 million to put together a core staff, a facility, et cetera. Again, all for the purpose of continuing to generate this sense of urgency and collaboration. But the difference is, as Vice President, I was able to get 10 countries to sign memorandum of understanding in sharing of data with us. And to implement that now requires, we can't just let it sit there. We got to actually do it. And so it's basically continuing the work of the Moonshot, and we have some outside groups who are going to be keeping as watchdogs, and are going to hold a conference in the year anniversary of the Moonshot, that where we look at all we've done as it being continued, of everybody keeping the deal. And so it's basically the same initiative to change the culture. There's a lot of detail I can give you to bore the hell out of you before dinner, but it's that and maintaining this urgency of now.
So obviously there are a lot of issues we're facing, and you hit some of them clearly. Data sharing. I mean, if we started to pool data and work as a team, just like they put a man on the moon or got to Mars, we can do the same. What about other smaller issues that to many people are the big issue? Every new cancer drug now is priced at $140,000 or above, irrespective of how good it is or what the value is. It's what the market will bear. And obviously, I had a patient this morning, I wanted to give him 3 drugs. I mean, that's over $300,000, and he works at the Postal Service. And he doesn't know what to do because the drugs aren't approved for his indication, and it's like a gun to your head.
Well, look, we had we called together a summit. You were there. We put together 400 people at leading experts, including industry, in Washington, one of the universities, and there were a total of 300 of these done around the country and in every state, et cetera. And we generated a lot of really, really good ideas. One of them related to my meeting and a panel, and I don't know if you were a part of that panel, with 9 of the major drug companies.
I was there.
You were there.
I was the only non-drug person.
Yeah.
It's a little scary.
And
He's tough when he gets mad.
well, you know, look, here's the deal. When you have a drug that's been out on the market that's worked, I'll not mention the particular drug, that was 15 years ago at $25,000 a year, and now it's $180,000 a year. There's no justification for that. No one can show me why all of a sudden it went, being on the market for all that long, for 25. Now it's 125. It's like the EpiPen incident. It's absolutely immoral. Now, my job as a legislator or an executive is not to be about morality, but practicality. And so one of the things we've done, we've started, Greg is doing it, we've met with a number of the drug companies, and they are entitled to be recompensed for all of their effort and the risks they take, and so many drugs fail, and in the aggregate, how much it costs them to do it. And if in fact...
Love that. We're rewarding for failure. It's good.
Well, by the way, as you well know, sometimes you got to go through some failures to get the reward. And so, but then I'm prepared to organize Democrats and Republicans to make clear that it is a U.S. responsibility of American taxpayers to step up, if need be, to compensate, to make available at a reasonable price that particular drug or those drugs. One of the good things that's going to happen, hoping to drive down costs a little bit, David, is we set up this formulary where, you know, there's what about 220 drugs and therapies are on and or have not been patented yet or out there. And so we went, and ahead of time we said, look, if you go to a restaurant and you want to put money in a jukebox, you don't have to have a license agreement with Beyonce to hear her song or whomever, the Black Eyed Peas. You know, it's already been worked out. So with the help at the federal level, we worked out the intellectual property elements of this. 9 drug companies signed up first. I think there's 19 now. And they're putting all of their product that they're testing on the table, because what you've pointed out, and many of you are docs in the audience, that how do we get AIDS under control? Multiple drugs. Mm-hmm. Try to get a test of the dual or triple test. It can take you 1 year to 4 years to get 3 different drug companies to agree to share their data or make it available for tests. And so now there are, I think, 17 drug companies, and we've worked it out so if there's a breakthrough, we're the 3 drug companies. You get 37%, you get 33%, and I get the rest, because we've worked out that the value of what we've each put in. And it's a shortcut way for drug companies to move toward profitability on those items without taking the risk that they took before. And so there's a lot of those kinds of things that are available out there. But the end result is we have an obligation, it seems to me. If the therapy is discovered that in fact extends life, makes it, as a palliative, it makes it more livable and or cures, then society as a whole, we should take it to the people on the political end of this and say, look, drug companies should be rewarded. You can't ask them to pay the price for this. The public should pay the price for this. And so we're in discussion right now, and to my surprise, at least so far, there's actually, I shouldn't say so, well, it is my surprise. There is actually so far a rational discussion going on. How much fruit it bears, I think, depends directly upon whether or not we can keep this effort in this new fight with 21st century weapons a movement as much as it is an effort. And if we do, it puts a lot of pressure on people to act more responsibly.
I love it. You know, you as anybody know, obviously science needs to progress. We need the passion for science to go forward. And when we see scientists forced to march on Washington to say, you know, listen, you can't get rid of funding for science. You can't get rid of the, 30% of the EPA's budget. You can't cut the NIH. How are we going to get the next young generation excited to make a difference here? How are we going to make science part of our culture and continue to be so?
Well, look, I think they are excited now. You're starting to see a rising tide, of considerable rising tide. But what worries me, what I try to explain to my colleagues, is that, if we just for 1 or 2 years make significant cuts in the amount of money available for working on projects that scientists think are relevant, whether it's studying the 6th ring of Saturn or deciding what the protein is going to do, whatever it is, if you look down the road and you're a brilliant young person now looking to get into that field and you see it drying up, you say, I'm not going that direction. We'll lose a whole generation. I mean, not figuratively, literally, we'll lose a whole generation of young people who would have moved and migrated to the area of dealing with anything from Alzheimer's to cancer, whatever, and to instead decide that they're going to go and move in the direction of working on the new thing in terms of, nanotechnology that relates to a totally different subject. So it matters. So even though we did not cut, if you notice the budget agreement that's been reached, there are no cuts.
Yes.
There's no cuts because guess what? The public has moved ahead of the administration. There's certain things that, and by the way, there's some really, I've spent my life, as Ariana knows because she's covered me a while, getting on with an awful lot of Republicans. There's a lot of really good people. They're good, decent people. And some of the leaders in this area, fortunately, are guys like Upton and Lamar Alexander. And, there's some serious leaders in the House and Senate on the Republican side who said, no. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. And so what's happened, it always takes time. The only thing I know more than all of you is how the legislature works. Presumption of me to say, but I think I do after all these years, as well as how the executive and legislative work together. There is a point that comes, usually later than sooner, when the congressional party of the president works up the courage to challenge him. Well, because of the polling numbers, I'm not making a judgment whether they're deserved or not, because they are hit rock bottom for the president, there's an awful lot of guys who are looking for the lifeboat. And a lot of Republicans are now saying, no. I'm standing up. I'm going to be counted. I am going to take on. It's not an easy thing for a congressman to take on a president who is putting a lot of pressure on them. So I think our Republican colleagues have decided there are certain things that are just not negotiable. They're just not going to go along. And I think the science, the EPA, the idea that we're gutting, the proposals to gut the EPA. Come on, for Christ's sake, for gosh sakes. It's just bizarre. It's bizarre. And anyway, so I don't want to get.
So in that
don't
vein,
get me going. The answer is I think we're going to dodge this bullet. I think we're going to at least hold our own for the near term. And I think that the public is going to continue to demand, as they did, that we in fact not jettison what they believe is one of the functions and purpose of government, is to protect their health and their safety. They make a correlation between what we do in terms of the environment, in terms of medical research, in terms of basic research across the board, And thank God we have the research universities we have, because we had a brilliant president named Eisenhower who decided to funnel the money that way. We have more research universities of consequence than the entire rest of the world combined. That's where this all comes from. And so there's just too many interests out there.
All right.
For this to happen.
So,
I think.
Just between you and me, with nobody else listening, obviously 2020 is not that far away. Would you consider, and I know the answer is no, but would you consider, going back in the ring and using this remarkable experience you have and ability to make things happen to benefit the people in this country?
Look, as some of you know and the press knows, I have the bad habit of answering questions. And I'll be completely honest with you, and I'm not mincing words. I had planned on running for president before Bo was diagnosed. And look, this is the part that sounds awful, but it's the truth. No woman or man should run for president unless they truly believe that they're the best qualified person to do it. I thought that the problems we're facing at that moment were particularly susceptible to those few talents I have and are in my wheelhouse. So I am enormously optimistic about the possibilities of this country. Folks, the rest of the world, my God, we are so well positioned relative to the rest of the world to lead the 21st century, for God's sake. That's not hyperbole. I mean, it's mind-blowing. China, I know Xi better than any world leader. I've spent more time with him than any world leader. I've spent 25 hours at private dinners with him. When the president asked me about how to measure the man, I told this to him. I said, he's the look of a man who's about to take on a job that he knows is not going to end well. Imagine being, not only do they not have energy, they don't have enough water. They don't have enough water. They're talking about $2 trillion projects to change the direction of their two major rivers to accommodate 40% of their population. 30% of their arable land is polluted with cadmium. That's bad for us and bad for them. But the point is that China, as our competition, is just, we want them to do really well, but we are in the driver's seat. I remember talking to a lot of people at a function like this 6 years ago where I said, the EU is not our competition. Raise your hand if you think the EU is our economic competition now. I wish they were. It'd be in our, no, I mean it sincerely. It'd be in our interest if they were. But the generic point is we are so much better positioned than we think we are. And so when I sat there and looked at the opportunities that, and I thought the things that I've spent my life doing, I thought I was the best qualified person to run. And so I started off and I planned on running. And I, honest to God, thought I wouldn't do that. I thought I could win the nomination, and Hillary's incredibly talented, but I wasn't running against Hillary. I was running for what I thought we should be doing. And I thought I could win a general election. The polling data throughout showed I could beat any Republican, and showed I would, in a three-way race, be 8 points behind Hillary. But that's not relevant anymore, because what happened was life intervened. The president always kids me. I said, reality has a way of intruding. And it intervened. And my son and my family, and things changed. And it wasn't my family didn't want me to run. Bo really wanted me to run. You know that. I mean, and my boy, my son Hunter is the brightest kid I know. He's a grown man. And my daughter, my wife, they thought it would also keep us together and give us purpose to continue to do things. But I just knew the second thing nobody should do if they're going to run, if they can't look the public in the eye, in addition to saying I believe they're the best qualified, is to say, I promise you I'll give you this, I'll give you all of my attention, all of my effort. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't have the strength to look at you and say, I guarantee you I can do that. Now, the election's over. Donald Trump is president, and I'm disappointed, to state the obvious. You always ask whether I wish I were president. Yeah, I'd rather be president. But it was the right decision for me not to run. So the second thing is that I'm a great respecter of fate in my life, the way it's worked, and I don't plan on running. But everybody says because I won't commit that I will not run under any circumstance, it must mean I'm running. I'm doing nothing to run. No, I really mean this. But what I am doing is I've been able to do what I wanted to do, what I was thinking about when we knew we were leaving the White House and not running. I've been able to take the brightest minds that were in our administration, among the brightest minds, and take them out of the West Wing, take them out of the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security agencies, and have them work with me. Because of the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Delaware, the foundation, as well as the Moonshot, I have $7 million of paid staff that work for me right now. And they're the very people, like Tony Blinken and others, who, had we won, would be Secretary of State, would be the people running these departments. Because my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, it's a lucky person who gets up in the morning, puts both feet in the floor, knows what they're about to do, and thinks it still matters. How many successful people do you know, really successful people you know, don't think it matters anymore what they're doing? This is all I've done my whole life since I've been 26 years old. And it matters to me. So I plan on trying to affect policy. I plan on trying to be, through those institutions, the Biden institutes, an intellectual force to make cases as the direction I think the country should go. And I plan on being deeply involved, and I make no bones about it, in trying to rebuild the Democratic Party as an alternative. As an alternative. Because I don't think there's any inconsistency like the false debate going on in my party now. We have to either be less progressive and more pro-white working guy, or we have to be more progressive and forget white working guys. That's bizarre. I've never found there's any inconsistency. Yeah. I'll conclude by saying this. I did 83 events for Hillary. And to make the point to everybody in the Democratic Party, think of this. This is the one campaign, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, my guess is you're mostly Republican. I'm not being facetious. I hope you are, because hear my point. It's the first time I can remember a campaign where you heard no talk about the plight of the middle class. That guy making $50,000 on the assembly line, and his wife is a hostess making 30 grand. They got 3 kids, and guess what? They can't make it, and they're scared to death. Those of you who heard docs out there, the two economic professors of Princeton did this report recently. You know, the only cadre of people in the last 75 years whose life expectancy has gone down are white boys between the age of 45 and 54. It's called hopelessness. They have the highest degree of suicide, the highest rate of suicide, opiate abuse, divorce. It's called hopelessness. My dad knew another expression. He said, Joe, remember, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the communities. Being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, there's a hopelessness out there. And so we're not speaking to it. My party, we're not speaking to it. And yet, there's no inconsistency with, I take no backseat to anybody in terms of my progressive credentials. So to make a point, I went up to Lorain, Ohio, 3,000 auto workers toward the end of the campaign. And I started off, I think Huffington Post reported it. I started off to make a point, and I told the campaign to listen. I started off and said, you know, what I'm most concerned about today is equal pay for women. And the place went nuts. You know why, folks? Their wives, they're all married and they all work. If they get paid, their standard of living goes up. Those working class guys care about equal pay for women. Then I said, and by the way, who you marry depends on who you love. Stay the hell out of their business. Cheers. Not a joke. When I came out on Meet the Press, I made a bet with the president that the public is already ahead of us. 58% of the people already thought that. And then I said, and by the way, Any man who raises a hand to a woman is a coward, and if you don't step in to stop it, you're complicitous. You're an accomplice. They cheered. No, but these are working class white boys. So this idea that they're different, remember, the black guy won them before. So this false dichotomy here is somehow that, you got to be less progressive and you got to be more. There's no inconsistency. And so it kind of goes back to the cancer piece. One of the reasons why I feel so strongly about it is, now the millennials are 2/3% larger than my generation, the baby boomers. And it's interesting. My whole generation grew up believing there wasn't a single thing the United States couldn't do. Not a joke. I mean, not a joke. Yet today, in both political parties, is, oh, I don't know, man. Woe is me. I don't know if we can do that. One of the reasons to do the cancer piece, David, is the degree to which you make significant progress. It's going to make people say, we can. We can. There's so much we can do. And folks, it gets down to three basic things for me. I don't know how the hell I got into this, but but it gets down to three basic things. There's three basic fundamental American values that are in both parties. One, everybody is entitled to be treated with dignity. Number two, in America, we always think big. We don't think small. We don't think incrementally. That's not who we are. That's never who we have been. And as I always tell the president in the 8 years, because he inherited a god-awful mess, when he'd be really down, we'd have a meeting in the Oval, everybody would walk out, and you see those pictures, he opens the door and pushes everybody out. I'd occasionally close the door and say, when I got asked to be vice president, I said I didn't want to do that, and I really didn't want to do it. And he said, I need an answer now. It was on the Metroliner. I said, the answer is no. I'll help you in any way I can. He said, how much time do you need? I said, I don't need any time. He said, it's true story. I said, go home and talk to your family. To my surprise, my family said, no, go ahead and do it. You should do it. And my mother, God love her, was still alive. She was a kicker. She said, Joey, let me get this straight, honey. She was 92. We're on the back porch. She said, let me get this straight. When you were a kid and 13 and they sold that house to an African-American in Carcroft Crest down the road, and I told you not to go down when those people were protesting, and you got arrested being on the front porch of the black family? I said, yeah, Mom, I remember that. She said, and then you were the only white lifeguard in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware, and only guy that worked there, and then you had this great job with a white shoe firm, and then you quit to become a public defender when Wilmington was burned to the ground. I said, yeah, Mom. She said, no, let me get this straight, honey. You're told the first African-American in history can be president, who's told you he needs you to win Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida. And you told him no, honey? But anyway, so I started the vetting. And my daughter, who is the most liberal, she runs the largest nonprofit in the state for people getting out of jail. Anyway, we're waiting to hear whether he picked me. And so and we're in recess and in August, and she comes home she's in her own apartment, she's married, she comes home to my house for lunch, and she walked in and she said, Daddy, he called you, didn't he? He called you. And I said, yeah, he called. She said, you said yes, didn't you? I said, yes, I did, honey, I told you. She jumped up and she said, Daddy, you know how you're always quoting Seamus Heaney and the Cure at Troy and the line, hope and history rhyme? She said, this is hope and history. Remember, his slogan was hope. He was hope. I said, oh, he's hope, I'm history.
Yeah.
So every time he'd get down, it's the last point about optimism, I'd close the door and I said, Mr. President, don't make me hope. Because the country will never be more optimistic than its president. It's never more optimistic than its president. So folks, there's so much within our grasp. So much change going to take place. And God willing, it will be in the area of cancer. It's just And if it does, I think you're going to see it has a transformative effect on how we think about ourselves beyond the tens of thousands of lives that will be altered positively. When Kennedy announced the moonshot, everybody remembers all the things he talked about going to the moon. But the one line that sticks out in my mind from that speech is we said, we are no longer ready to postpone. We should be no longer ready to postpone. Thank you all.